In the quiet town of Elmswood, nestled deep within a dark forest, the villagers spoke in hushed tones of a creature that haunted their nights. Elmswood had always been a sleepy place, where time seemed to stand still, and shadows lengthened earlier than they should. However, an unsettling feeling had started to creep into the hearts of its residents. It began with the livestock. Sheep and goats found lifeless, their bodies drained of blood, to puncture marks on their necks, a chilling testament to their fate. The villagers whispered of old legends, stories told by grandparents of a hungry, bloodthirsty vampire that once terrorized their ancestors. But those were just tales to scare children, weren't they? One chilly autumn evening, young Clara returned home from the market. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and a thick fog rolled in, shrouding the path in an eerie mist. The lanterns lining the streets flickered, as if struggling to stay lit. Clara quickened her pace, her heart pounding louder with each step. Suddenly, she felt a presence behind her. She turned, but there was nothing, just the fog and the faint rustling of leaves. Dismissing it as her imagination, she continued on, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. Reaching her home, Clara sighed in relief and bolted the door behind her. She lit a candle, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She was about to settle down for the evening when she heard a soft, almost imperceptible tap at the window. Clara's blood ran cold. She slowly turned her head, her eyes locking onto the window pane. There, staring back at her, were the glowing, crimson eyes. Panic surged through her. The stories couldn't be true, she thought, but as the eyes bore into hers, a primal fear took hold. The figure outside was tall and gaunt, its pale skin almost translucent under the moonlight. It smiled, revealing sharp, glistening fangs. Clara's scream caught in her throat as she backed away, knocking over the candle. The room plunged into darkness. She scrambled to relight it, her hands shaking uncontrollably. When the flame finally flickered back to life, the figure was gone. She bolted upstairs, her mind racing. What should she do? She could feel the vampire's presence lurking outside, waiting. Clara grabbed a crucifix from her nightstand and clutched it tightly, praying for dawn to come quickly. But the night had just begun. Outside, the vampire prowled, its hunger growing with each passing moment. Clara knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. She had to find a way to escape, to warn the others, to survive. As she devised a plan, the vampire's tap at the window grew louder, more insistent. And then, the lock on the door began to turn. Clara's breath came in shallow, rapid gasps as she heard the faint, sinister click of the lock turning. Her mind raced through every possible escape route, every defense she could muster. The crucifix felt heavy in her trembling hands, a fragile hope against the darkness outside. The door creaked open, inch by inch, revealing the creature's silhouette against the dim light of the moon. It moved with an eerie grace, its eyes glowing a deeper red, its fangs bared in a predatory grin. Clara pressed herself against the far wall, her heart pounding like a drum. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice quivering with fear. The vampire stepped into the room, the cold air around it chilling Clara to the bone. "I am the end of your nights," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "The hunger that never sleeps." With a burst of courage, Clara raised the crucifix. The vampire recoiled, a hiss of pain escaping its lips, but it quickly regained its composure. "You think that will save you?" it sneered. "Faith is only as strong as the one who wields it." Desperate, Clara glanced around the room, her eyes landing on the small window above her bed. If she could just reach it, maybe she could escape. She bolted towards it, but the vampire moved with lightning speed, blocking her path. "No, my dear," it whispered, its cold breath on her neck. "There is no escape." Clara swung the crucifix with all her might, the tip grazing the vampire's cheek. It howled in pain, retreating momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, Clara scrambled to the window, pushing it open. The cold night air rushed in, and she could see the dense forest beyond. She hesitated for a split second, knowing the dangers that lay outside, but the immediate threat behind her left no choice. She climbed out, dropping into the bushes below. Ignoring the scratches on her arms and legs, Clara ran, her feet pounding the earth, her breaths ragged. The forest closed in around her, branches clawing at her as she fled. She could hear the vampire behind her, its pursuit relentless. Clara's mind raced, searching for a sanctuary, a place to hide. Her thoughts turned to the old church at the edge of the village, its ancient stones and sacred ground rumored to repel evil. With renewed determination, she altered her course, heading towards the church. The vampire was close now. She could feel its icy presence. Clara's legs burned with exhaustion, but she pressed on, the silhouette of the church steeple coming into view. She reached the heavy wooden doors, slamming into them with all her weight. They creaked open, and Clara stumbled inside, collapsing onto the cold stone floor. She glanced back, expecting to see the vampire right behind her, but it had stopped at the threshold, unable to enter the sacred space. For a moment, Clara felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The vampire stared at her with a malevolent intensity. "This is not over," it vowed, its voice a menacing whisper that echoed through the empty church. "I will find you, and when I do, your blood will be mine." Clara shivered, her mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. She knew she was safe for now, but the vampire's words haunted her. How long could she stay in the church? Where could she go that it wouldn't follow? As the first light of dawn began to seep through the stained glass windows, Clara realized she needed help. She needed to understand what she was up against. Her only hope lay in the ancient texts and hidden knowledge of the town's recluse, an old man named Elias, who lived in a crumbling mansion on the outskirts of Elmswood. Summoning what little strength she had left, Clara made her way to the back of the church where an old, dusty Bible lay. She opened it, hoping to find answers, but what she found was an ancient map leading to Elias's mansion. With the vampire's threat lingering in her mind, Clara knew her journey was far from over. She had to find Elias and uncover the secrets of the vampire before it was too late. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows through the church, and Clara set out once more, her heart filled with fear but also with a flicker of hope. The battle had just begun. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Clara navigated through the dense forest, clutching the ancient map she had found in the church. The path to Elias's mansion was treacherous, overgrown with thorny bushes and tangled roots, but Clara pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination. She knew the vampire would not rest until it had her, and Elias was her only hope. The old mansion loomed in the distance, its crumbling facade barely visible through the thick foliage. Clara's heart raced as she approached, the eerie silence of the forest amplifying her every footstep. She reached the heavy iron gate, which creaked ominously as she pushed it open. The mansion's windows were dark, like empty eyes watching her every move. Gathering her courage, Clara knocked on the massive wooden door. For a moment, there was no response, and she feared she had come all this way for nothing. But then, the door slowly opened, revealing a gaunt, elderly man with piercing blue eyes. His hair was a wild tangle of white, and his clothes hung loosely on his frail frame. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse but firm. "My name is Clara," she replied, her voice trembling. "I need your help." There's a vampire. Before she could finish, Elias's eyes widened with recognition. "Come inside, quickly," he said, pulling her through the door and shutting it firmly behind her. "We don't have much time." The interior of the mansion was just as dilapidated as the exterior, filled with dusty old books and strange artifacts. Elias led Clara to a small study, where a fire burned in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. He gestured for her to sit, then began rummaging through a pile of ancient tomes. "Vampires," he muttered, more to himself than to Clara. "I never thought I'd see the day when one would return to Elmswood." Clara watched him anxiously. "What can we do? How can we stop it?" Elias finally found the book he was looking for and opened it to a page filled with intricate illustrations and cryptic text. "There's only one way to defeat a vampire of this kind," he said gravely. "We must find its resting place and drive a stake through its heart." Clara shuddered at the thought. "How do we find where it sleeps?" Elias pointed to a map in the book, which showed a series of underground tunnels beneath Elmswood. These tunnels were built centuries ago, and many have been forgotten. The vampire will have taken refuge in one of them. We must search them, but it won't be easy. The creature will protect its lair fiercely. As Elias spoke, a sense of dread settled over Clara. She had come this far, but the thought of venturing into dark, unknown tunnels filled her with fear. Still, she knew there was no other choice. "When do we start?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tonight," Elias replied. "We must go under the cover of darkness, when the vampire is most likely to be hunting. We'll need supplies: garlic, holy water, and of course, a stake." The rest of the day passed in a blur as Clara and Elias prepared for their perilous journey. As night fell, they made their way to the entrance of the tunnels, a hidden trapdoor in the forest floor. Clara's heart pounded as Elias lifted the door, revealing a steep, narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Stay close," Elias whispered, lighting a torch, "and be ready for anything." Clara followed him down the stairs, her senses on high alert. The air grew colder and damper the deeper they went, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed through the tunnels. They moved cautiously, every shadow and sound making Clara jump. After what felt like hours, they reached a large, cavernous chamber. The torchlight flickered, casting eerie shapes on the walls. Clara could see ancient coffins and stone sarcophagi, many covered in dust and cobwebs. Elias motioned for her to stay quiet as they searched for any sign of the vampire's lair. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the chamber. Clara's blood ran cold as she saw a pair of glowing red eyes emerging from the darkness. The vampire stepped into the light, its expression twisted with rage. "You dare to enter my domain," it snarled, advancing towards them. Elias raised his torch, the light reflecting off the vampire's pale skin. "Stay back," he commanded, but the creature merely laughed, revealing its sharp fangs. With a sudden, swift movement, the vampire lunged at them. Clara barely had time to react, swinging the crucifix she still held. The vampire recoiled, but it was only momentarily deterred. It regained its composure and snarled, preparing to strike again. Elias reached into his bag and pulled out a vial of holy water, throwing it at the vampire. The creature screamed as the water sizzled on its skin, retreating further into the chamber. Seizing the opportunity, Elias and Clara pressed on, determined to find the vampire's resting place. They reached a smaller, hidden chamber at the back of the cavern. There, in the center of the room, lay a stone coffin, its lid slightly ajar. Elias nodded to Clara, and together, they pushed the lid open. Inside, the vampire lay in its true form, a ghastly sight with pale, withered skin and hollow eyes. Elias handed Clara the stake and hammer. "You must do it," he said, his voice steady. "It has to be you." Clara's hand shook as she positioned the stake over the vampire's heart. The creature's eyes fluttered open, and it let out a final, blood-curdling scream as she drove the stake through its chest. The vampire convulsed, then lay still, its body disintegrating into dust. Clara collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed with relief and exhaustion. Elias placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. "You did it." But as Clara looked around the chamber, a nagging feeling of unease remained. Something about the vampire's final scream, the look in its eyes, told her that this battle was not truly over. There were secrets still buried in Elmswood's dark history, secrets that could come back to haunt them. For now, though, Clara allowed herself a moment of peace. She and Elias climbed back out of the tunnels, emerging into the fresh night air. The forest was eerily silent, as if holding its breath. Clara knew that the fight against darkness was far from over, but she had proven to herself that she could face it. As they walked back to the village, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they had only uncovered the tip of the iceberg. She glanced at Elias, who seemed lost in thought. "What's next?" she asked quietly. Elias sighed, his expression grave. "There are more like it," he said. "More creatures hidden in the shadows, and we must be ready." Clara nodded, steeling herself for the challenges ahead. The night visitor had been defeated, but the darkness still lingered, waiting for the next opportunity to strike, and Clara knew that she would be ready when it did. The days turned into weeks, and Elmswood slowly returned to its usual, sleepy routine. Clara resumed her daily life, though the memory of the vampire's attack never fully faded. She found herself glancing over her shoulder more often, her senses heightened by the lingering fear. Elias became a frequent visitor, helping her and the other villagers fortify their homes with garlic and other protective measures. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the familiar fog rolled in, Clara felt a strange unease settle over her. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, trying to shake off the feeling. The room seemed to grow colder, and the shadows on the walls flickered menacingly. A sudden knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She approached the door cautiously, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice wavering. "It's Elias," came the familiar, reassuring voice. Relieved, Clara unbolted the door and let him in. Elias stepped inside, looking more haggard than usual. His eyes darted around the room, as if expecting something to leap out at them. "Clara, we need to talk," he said, his voice urgent. "What's wrong?" she asked, her anxiety returning. "There's been a discovery," Elias said, lowering his voice. "In the old church records, I found references to something called the Coven. It's an ancient group of vampires, much more powerful than the one we defeated." Clara's blood ran cold. "Are you saying there are more of them?" Elias nodded grimly. "Yes, and I fear they know what we've done. They may be coming for us, seeking revenge." A heavy silence filled the room as Clara processed this new information. Just as she opened her mouth to respond, a chilling wind swept through the house, extinguishing the fire and plunging the room into darkness. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she fumbled for a candle, her fingers shaking. "Stay calm," Elias whispered, lighting his own torch. "We need to be ready." Suddenly, the windows shattered, and the room was filled with a swirling, unnatural fog. Clara and Elias backed into the center of the room, clutching their torches. From the mist emerged shadowy figures, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. The Coven had arrived. Clara's grip tightened on her torch as the vampires encircled them, their presence suffocating. The leader of the group stepped forward, a tall, regal figure with an aura of malevolence. "You dare to challenge us?" it hissed, its voice echoing with centuries of hatred. Elias raised his torch defensively. "We'll not let you harm this village," he declared, though Clara could hear the tremor in his voice. The leader laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "You cannot stop us. We are eternal. And now, you will pay for your defiance." In a blur of motion, the vampires attacked. Clara swung her torch wildly, the flames warding off the nearest assailants. But there were too many of them. She felt claws rake her skin, cold hands grasping at her. Elias fought valiantly beside her, but they were quickly overwhelmed. Just as Clara thought all was lost, a brilliant light filled the room. The vampires recoiled, hissing in pain. Clara turned to see Elias holding an ancient, glowing amulet, its light burning the creature's flesh. "Go!" Elias shouted, thrusting the amulet at Clara. "Take this and run." Clara hesitated for a moment, her eyes meeting Elias's. He nodded, a silent plea for her to survive. She grabbed the amulet and bolted out of the house, the light guiding her through the darkened streets. Behind her, she heard Elias's screams mingling with the vampire's roars. Tears streamed down her face as she ran, the amulet's light dimming with every step. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The fog thickened, and Clara stumbled, falling to her knees. In the distance, she heard the faint echo of the vampire's laughter, a chilling reminder that they were still out there, hunting her. She clutched the amulet tightly, praying for dawn to come. As the first light of day broke through the fog, Clara realized that the fight was far from over. The Coven would never stop hunting her, and Elmswood would never truly be safe. She would have to keep running, keep fighting, keep surviving. And somewhere in the shadows, the vampires watched, waiting for their chance to strike again. Clara knew that as long as they existed, she would never know peace. The night had claimed its victims, but the darkness still lingered, an ever-present threat that would haunt Clara for the rest of her days. Hatch, the end.